Zoom book, Thomas Ross. We start out in the Milky Way galaxy. Eons ago, our sun formed in a nebula in this area. It eventually ignited and began to produce thermal energy through nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion creates energy by fusing two hydrogen atoms in order to create one helium. This thermal energy then leaves the sun, since such a large amount is produced, and goes from the sun to the earth. It takes 8 minutes for this energy to reach the earth. From there, it goes down to the Sonoran Desert ecosystem. From here, the energy goes to the prickly pear cactus, which is one of the many producers of the Sonoran Desert ecosystem. The prickly pear cactus uses this energy, or ATP as it is sometimes called, in order to jumpstart the photosynthesis reaction. Along with H2O or water and carbon dioxide, the ATP is used by the plant in order to produce glucose, which is C6H12O6. This converts the thermal energy into chemical energy, which can be used by other organisms such as squirrels. The prickly pear cactus uses this energy in ways such as reproduction, and ends up using approximately 90% of it, not accounting for the small percentage that dissipates out into the environment through EDIS. So, when a squirrel will eat the prickly pear cactus, if the cactus only had 100,000 joules of energy, then the squirrel will only get 10,000 of that. This is why the squirrel might eat more than one piece of cactus. The squirrel uses this energy, which is converted into glucose, in order to perform cellular respiration, which creates energy in the cells of the organism. The squirrel will only use 90% of that energy. Eventually, the squirrel will use 90% of 10,000 joules, which is what it got from the cactus, to survive. Or, some of this energy will dissipate into the environment through EDIS. This leaves only 1,000 joules for the rattlesnake, who eats the squirrel. Now, most of y'all are asking, this is a video. I know, you're gonna love it. I will probably not talk during it very much, since we have some birds providing their own commentary. So, enjoy! The rattlesnake uses the energy in the same manner that the squirrel was. However, the rattlesnake will have to eat many more squirrels in order to get the same amount of energy, since they get less from the squirrel. But the rattlesnake will only get 1,000 joules of energy from the cactus. Again, the rattlesnake will use 90% of this 1,000 joules to survive, or some of it will dissipate into the environment. From there, the hawk will only get 100 joules of energy from the snake that came from the cactus. And by the way, we have another video supplied by the great people at National Geographic.
You'd have to be one tough and hungry animal to try to make a meal out of a venomous western diamondback rattlesnake. After all, this North American desert dweller is one of the most dangerous snakes in the world. Its bite is loaded with hemotoxic venom, and this can cause considerable pain and tissue damage in any creature it sinks its fangs into. Enter the red-tailed hawk. With a wingspan reaching nearly 5 feet, it's one of the largest hawk species in the world. The bird of prey wastes no time. It swoops right in to make a quick meal out of the snake. The rattler is instantly on guard. it sounds its trademark warning signal. Now check out this matador move. The red-tailed hawk is trying to divert the rattler, get it to strike at its wing feathers and expose its head. The hawk jumps the rattler and digs in its talons. The issue of which animal is the superior predator is quickly established. The hawk makes short work of the rattler, and short work produces a long, enjoyable meal.
The hawk will use this energy that it acquired from the many rattlesnakes that it has eaten in the same manner in which all of the other animals have used it. But now we're going to take a peek into the hawk and see the inside of it and how the energy is obtained, digested, transported, and excreted from the body. Also, we will look at the gas being oxygen and how it is obtained, transported, and excreted out of the body. The energy from the sun will enter the hawk through its tongued beak, which otherwise, with the exception of the tongue, appears to be a basic beak. From there, it goes down the esophagus into the crop, which is rather large, by the way, which holds the food until it can be accessed by the gizzard. The gizzard is a sac with rocks, which sort of resembles our stomach in the fact that it grinds the food into smaller bits. From there, it goes into the small intestine, where it is squirted with bile from the gallbladder. That concludes the digestive system of a hawk. Now I will talk about the respiratory system of one, since both systems share the same circulatory system, which transports both gas and food macromolecules around the body. The hawk acquires its oxygen through its nares, which are two nostrils positioned above the beak of a hawk. From there, the oxygen travels down past the glottis into the larynx, then to the trachea, then down a couple tubes into the lungs of the hawk. The lungs prepare the hawk for entrance into the circulatory system via the capillaries. A hawk's bloodstream shares much with a human's, both of whom transmit macromolecules and oxygen into the circulatory system by means of capillaries. Also, both have a four-chambered heart with a left atrium, left ventricle, and right ventricle, both of whom use blood vessels such as veins and arteries to transmit quantities of macromolecules and oxygen throughout the body, as shown by this illustration. Now, we will go to the hawk's excretory system, everyone's favorite nuisance. First, I will start out with respiratory excretory system. The hawk produces CO2 as a byproduct of cellular respiration, which exits the hawk via the nares, which are the little holes shown on top of the beak. Being a complex tertiary consumer, the hawk has both solid and liquid waste. First, I will focus on the hawk's liquid waste, which passes through its urinary system. The hawk has a series of what appears to be 3 kidneys, which filters out the blood in the hawk when it passes through the kidneys. From there, it goes into the ureters and into the anus to prepare for exit through the vent. The hawk's solid waste exits the small intestine into the large intestine, then goes into the cloaca, where it is prepared to be released along with solid waste through the vent, which, when it's released, it will come out as shown above, which you don't want to see on your car. The remaining oxygen and macromolecules, which were not excreted from the hawk, will now go through the bloodstream to a cell which needs them. They will enter the cell through either diffusion or active transport. Diffusion is when the molecules simply diffuse into a cell through its open cell membrane. However, active transport requires ATP and occurs when a cell reaches out and grabs a molecule which it needs, as shown. When this energy enters the cell through these various forms, such as active transport and diffusion, it is currently in a form called glucose, which has been broken down into monosaccharides, which are little sugar molecules. From there, it goes into the cytoplasm of an animal cell and begins its first process, glycosis. Glycolysis is a process which occurs in the cytoplasm of an animal cell, which converts one glucose molecule into two pyruvate molecules, and also produces two ATP at the same time. This is the first stage and occurs in all animal cells, regardless of whether or not oxygen is present. If oxygen is present, then it will go into the Krebs cycle, which I will explain later. If oxygen is not, then it will go through a process called fermentation, in which lactic acid is produced in most animals, while in some, like bacteria and yeast, alcohol is produced. If oxygen is present, it goes into the mitochondria, the aptly named powerhouse of the cell, in order to begin both the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, which produces most of the energy for the cell and the organ. In the beginning of the Krebs cycle, pyruvate loses carbon molecules, which are released through carbon dioxide. This forms acyl CoA, which forms more CO2 through the Krebs cycle. The most important part of the Krebs cycle is that many electrons are taken away from the pyruvate by NADH and FADH2. Through the Krebs cycle, the cell gains 2 ATP. The NADH and FADH2 go to the electron transport chain, which is an array of proteins in a membrane in the mitochondria. The NADH and FADH2 gives up its electrons during the electron transport chain. The electrons are pulled through the chain towards oxygen. The energy produced through this pulling is used to pull hydrogen ions up into the inner membrane space. The oxygen captures the electrons and some hydrogen ions, which produces H2O, or commonly known as water. The hydrogen ions store the energy from the glucose, and since a large amount of hydrogen ions are pulled up into the intermembrane space by the energy produced by the electrons, this is where most of the energy will come from for the cell. So these hydrogen ions, like a dam breaking because it has too much water, flow down a tube called the ATP synthase. The ATP synthase captures their energy and uses it to power ADP in order to create ATP. 32 ATP is created by this process, which makes it 36 total by aerobic respiration, while only 2 total if you skip the 2 phases inside the mitochondria. So the byproducts from cellular respiration, such as ATP, CO2, and H2O, go many different ways. ATP will go inside the cell and power the cell, or if there's too much, will possibly go out and filter out through diffusion or active transport. H2O, or water, will either get stored in the vacuole, which is a holding area in an animal cell, or it will filter out via osmosis, which is water's version of diffusion/active transport. And CO2 will just exit the cell, go into the bloodstream, and then go back out and exit the hawk through the nares. Excess water produced by cellular respiration, which is not needed and not stored in the vacuoles, will be excreted from the hawk via the urinary tract system, which I explained earlier. Now what will the hawk do with this newly acquired energy gotten from the electron transport chain, Krebs cycle, and glycolysis, which was transported into the cell via the circulatory system of the hawk, and at least the glucose, which is digested via the digestive system of a hawk, and obtained by the beak of the hawk, or the nares of the hawk, depending on whether or not it was oxygen or glucose. The glucose was also obtained from the snake, who got it from the squirrel, who got it from the prickly pear cactus, who got it from the sun. Thank you for listening to my presentation about the Sonoran Desert ecosystem.